I sacrificed everything for my brother's future, and he threw it all away, so I made him pay dearly. I'm 27, and I have a younger brother named Ethan, who is 24. We grew up with a single father who did his best, but money was always tight. Bills were paid late, groceries were a struggle, and anything beyond necessities was a luxury we couldn't afford. By the time I was old enough to work, I was already used to stepping up, taking care of Ethan, handling chores, and making sure things ran smoothly at home while Dad juggled jobs. College was never a guarantee for either of us, but Ethan was the smart one, at least according to everyone. Teachers praised him, family members encouraged him, and Dad made it clear that Ethan was the one who had a future worth investing in. So when it came time to decide what to do after high school, it was never really a question. I gave up my shot at college and went straight into work. At first, it was just a retail job, then a second job waitressing. Eventually, I was balancing overnight shifts too, sleeping in short bursts whenever I could. The money I made went straight to Ethan, his tuition, books, rent, and even groceries so he could focus on his studies. I lived as cheaply as possible, eating instant noodles, wearing the same worn-out sneakers for years, and skipping doctor's appointments I couldn't afford. Dad saw this as my duty. If I ever hesitated or complained, he reminded me that Ethan was going to be the one to make it, the one who could lift us out of poverty. My sacrifice wasn't really a sacrifice, he said, it was an investment in our future. For a while, it seemed like he was right. Ethan graduated with honors, top of his class, and landed a high-paying finance job straight out of college. When he called me that day to celebrate, he told me I wouldn't have to struggle anymore, that he would return the favor and help me get my life back on track. That was the moment I let myself believe things would finally get easier. I started looking at community colleges, thinking I could finally take the classes I had put off for years. I even let myself imagine moving into a place of my own instead of staying in the cramped apartment I shared with 2 roommates. Ethan told me I deserved it, that he would make sure I got the chance I never had. But then everything changed. At first, it was small things. He moved into a high-rise apartment in the city, saying he needed a nice place to reflect his new status. When I mentioned repayment, he brushed it off, saying he was still settling in. Then came the designer clothes, the luxury vacations, the expensive dinners. His social media was filled with pictures of rooftop parties and weekend getaways while I was still working double shifts to make rent. I brought it up again more directly this time, and he told me to be patient. The final blow came when I sat him down and told him I needed the money back, not all at once, just in payments, anything really. He didn't even hesitate before telling me I was on my own. You did what you had to do as a brother, he said. No one forced you. That was it, years of sacrifice dismissed like they meant nothing. I walked out of that conversation knowing one thing: Ethan was never going to pay me back. He had no intention of helping me, not now, not ever. I had spent years breaking my back so he could have a future, and the second he got what he wanted, he cut me off like I was disposable. That's when I made my decision. If he thought I was just going to let it go, he was dead wrong. The moment I walked out of that conversation with Ethan, I knew exactly what I had to do. He thought he could walk away from years of sacrifice without consequences. He thought I would let it go like all the other times I had put him first. He was wrong. I went home and opened my laptop. I had kept every receipt, every bank transfer, every text message where he had promised to pay me back. I had records of tuition payments, rent deposits, grocery bills, everything that proved I had financially supported him for years. Ethan had always been careful about his image. He liked to tell people he had worked hard to get where he was. But the messages he had sent me over the years told a different story. I'll pay you back as soon as I graduate. Thank you for everything. I couldn't have done this without you. I promise I'll take care of you like you took care of me. The proof was all there. He had admitted over and over again that he owed me. The next step was finding out what legal options I had. I booked an appointment with a lawyer, a no-nonsense man who took one look at I heard he tried to spin it as a misunderstanding, but Danielle wasn't buying it. He had been hinting at an engagement, but now she was pulling away, questioning everything he had ever told her. Then Ethan tried a new approach. He reached out with a half-hearted apology and a low-ball offer, hoping I would drop the issue. He offered me a few thousand, barely a fraction of what he owed me, and tried to guilt-trip me into letting it go. I rejected it immediately, full repayment, or I was taking him to court. Meanwhile, the public fallout wasn't slowing down. People from all parts of his life were finding out the truth: former classmates, co-workers, even distant relatives. Everyone was talking about it. Ethan had built his entire image around being a self-made man. Now people knew the truth. The final step was legal action. I had my lawyer draft and serve Ethan with legal papers demanding repayment. He had ignored me when I asked nicely. Now he had no choice but to face the consequences. The battle had officially begun. Things started unraveling for Ethan almost immediately after he was served with the legal papers. The fallout from my viral Reddit post was still growing, and it had made its way into every corner of his life. At work, people were talking. The whispers started: small, hushed conversations when he walked past, sideways glances in meetings. Then someone sent the Reddit post to the office group chat, and that was when things really went south. His co-workers started asking questions. Some of them had known him during college and had believed the story he told about putting himself through school. Now they were finding out the truth, that he had lived comfortably while I had been the one struggling to make ends meet. It didn't take long for HR to step in. Someone forwarded the post to them, and soon Ethan was sitting in a closed-door meeting with his boss. It wasn't about the lawsuit itself. His job didn't care about his personal debts, but his credibility was shot. He had built his entire career on being hardworking, responsible, and independent. Now his co-workers were questioning everything he had ever said. Meanwhile, things weren't looking good in his personal life either. Danielle's family got wind of the drama, and they weren't happy. They had already been hesitant about Ethan because he wasn't from a wealthy background, but now they thought he was a liar and a gold digger. Her parents sat her down and told her to rethink everything. They warned her that a man who would manipulate his own brother wouldn't hesitate to do the same to her. She hadn't even processed all of it yet when I sent her more proof: every bank transfer, every bill I had covered, every message where Ethan had promised to pay me back. After that, Danielle was done. Ethan's meltdown started with an angry text. He blamed me for ruining his life over something as small as money, as if years of sacrifice and financial struggle were nothing, as if he had the right to turn his back on me the second he didn't need me anymore. I ignored the message. My lawyer had already filed the lawsuit, and the court date was set. Then came the career hit. Ethan had been in line for a promotion, a big one, but after the HR meeting and all the office gossip, it didn't happen. They passed him over for someone else. That was when Danielle officially ended things. No more engagement talk, no more weekend trips together, no more shared future. She packed her things and left, refusing to take his calls. That's when the sobbing calls started. The same person who had blocked me just days ago was now desperate to talk. He called over and over again, but I didn't answer. The damage was done, and it was all his own doing. Our father tried next. He showed up at my apartment, angry and frustrated, telling me to let it go. According to him, Ethan had already suffered enough. He lost his girlfriend, his promotion, his social standing. Wasn't that punishment enough? I stood my ground. Family doesn't use each other as stepping stones. Ethan didn't stop there. He started telling anyone who would listen that the money had been a gift. He tried to twist the story, painting me as greedy and bitter. Unfortunately for him, my lawyer was already ahead of him. The bank transfers, the messages, even the casual texts where he had admitted to repaying me, there was no way for him to argue that it was a gift. His last supporters, mutual friends, old classmates, started pulling away. No one wanted to be associated with him after seeing how easily he could betray the person who had given up everything for him. Ethan tried to delay the court date, scrambling for a way out, but my lawyer shut that down immediately. There was no running from this. Realizing he was out of options, he made a last-ditch attempt at settling. He reached out through a mutual. Ethan had been laughing, telling our relatives how he couldn't have made it through college without me, talking about how he would repay me someday. He had been bragging back then, trying to make himself look grateful, but now it was undeniable proof that he had always known he owed me. The judge barely looked at Ethan as he tried to come up with an excuse. His lawyer scrambled, trying to claim that the money had been a gift, but the records told a different story. Every payment, every deposit was documented. The texts alone were enough to shut down that argument, but the bank statements sealed it. The ruling was clear: Ethan was ordered to repay me the full amount plus legal fees, with a strict deadline set, meaning he couldn't drag this out for years. That was when the waterworks started. He broke down, claiming he couldn't afford it, that he didn't have that kind of money, but the judge wasn't moved. The ruling stood, and the case was over. The fallout didn't stop there. I posted an update on Reddit, letting people know that justice had been served. The response was immediate: more support flooded in, more people calling Ethan out for what he had done. Then it hit his job. The scandal had already damaged his reputation at work, but now that people knew he had lost in court, it got worse. The whispers turned into direct avoidance: people didn't trust him. He wasn't getting invited to meetings, and his credibility was shot. And Danielle? She had officially moved on. Ethan found out through mutual friends that she had started dating someone else, someone with no baggage, no lies hanging over his head. He tried calling her, but she ignored every attempt. Then, just like that, Ethan went silent. No angry texts, no calls, no attempts to negotiate. That was what made me suspicious. He wasn't the type to just accept consequences. If he was quiet, that meant he was planning something. Ethan stayed quiet for weeks after the court ruling: no tantrums, no last-ditch apologies, nothing. Just silence. That alone was suspicious. Then I got a call from a mutual acquaintance, someone who had been watching everything unfold from the sidelines. Ethan had quit his job. He hadn't just lost the promotion, he had walked away entirely. He was planning to skip town. It made sense: he had no way of paying me back, and with his reputation in ruins, he probably thought disappearing would solve his problems. But I wasn't about to let him run from the consequences. I contacted my lawyer immediately. Since the debt was now court-ordered, we had options. Within days, a lien was filed against any assets he owned. His bank accounts were flagged: he couldn't just pack up and leave without dealing with the financial mess he had created. That's when the fire sale started. Ethan began selling off everything he owned: designer clothes, high-end furniture, expensive electronics. He had spent years living in luxury, thinking the money would never run out. Now he was scrambling to scrape together whatever he could, but it wasn't enough. He had burned through too much too fast, and no one was willing to lend him anything. Friends who had once partied with him in rooftop lounges were suddenly too busy to pick up his calls. No one wanted to be associated with him now that the truth was out. Then our father showed up at my door. Ethan had gone to him, spinning some sob story about how I was ruining his life. According to him, I was being cruel by enforcing the repayment, as if I hadn't spent years struggling just to keep him afloat. Dad wasn't there to talk, he was there to demand that I drop everything. He called me heartless and told me that family forgives, that Ethan was suffering enough already. I told him the same thing I had told Ethan: family doesn't use each other as stepping stones. If he cared so much, he could help him. But that was the thing: Dad didn't want to help Ethan financially, he wanted me to keep carrying the burden. When I refused, he gave up. After that, Ethan's situation got worse. His credit score tanked: he couldn't rent a decent place without a cosigner. No one wanted to hire him after everything that had come out. Employers talk, and word had spread fast in his industry. Then the final email came. It was long, bitter, and full of blame. He accused me of destroying him, of being jealous, of taking pleasure in his downfall. There wasn't a single apology, not once did he acknowledge what he had done to get here. I didn't respond. Instead, I sat back and let it sink in. For years, I had put Ethan first. I had given up everything so he could have a future, and in return, he had treated me like I was disposable. Now I was finally free. Ethan hit rock bottom fast. I also secured a stable job, one that actually paid well and gave me room to grow. No more double shifts, no more exhaustion, no more scraping by while someone else thrived on my sacrifices. Then Ethan resurfaced. The email he sent was long and dramatic. He claimed he had changed, that he had reflected on everything and realized he had made mistakes. But it wasn't an apology, it was an excuse. He talked about stress, about how he had been overwhelmed, about how he had never meant to hurt me. There was no mention of paying me back, no acknowledgement of what he had actually done. I ignored it. Then our father tried one last time. He called, insisting that I had to help Ethan. He had lost everything, he was struggling. He needed family now more than ever. He went on and on about how I was cruel for abandoning him when he was at his lowest. I told him the same thing I had before: if he cared so much, he could help Ethan himself. That was the last time we spoke. For closure, I posted one final update on Reddit, letting everyone know how things had turned out. The support was overwhelming. People were still calling Ethan out, still holding him accountable for what he had done. And then I moved on completely. I cut ties with Ethan and my father for good. I got accepted into an educational program, finally taking the steps I had once sacrificed so Ethan could go to college. It felt like reclaiming something that had been stolen from me. I also met someone who genuinely supported my ambitions, who encouraged me to keep moving forward instead of dragging me down. For the first time, I was surrounded by people who actually cared. Ethan became irrelevant. I heard through acquaintances that he was still struggling, still bouncing from one short-term job to another, still looking for someone to rescue him. But I didn't care anymore. For years, my entire life had revolved around him. Now it was mine again, and this time no one was going to take it from me. Months passed without a word from Ethan, no calls, no emails, no desperate attempts to get my attention. I had finally moved on, focusing on my own life, my own goals, and my own success. Then one morning, an email appeared in my inbox with the subject line, "Can we talk?" I didn't open it. I didn't need to. Ethan wasn't reaching out because he wanted to make amends. He had burned through every option and now he was circling back, hoping I would be the safety net he no longer had. I deleted it without reading. A few days later, my father showed up at my doorstep unannounced. It was early, too early for casual visits. He stood there, his expression tight, like he was preparing for a fight he already knew he would lose. Without waiting for an invitation, he stepped inside, shaking his head like he couldn't believe what he was about to say. Ethan was struggling, he was depressed. He had lost everything, he was at his breaking point. I let him talk. I let him say everything he had come to say, the same speech he had probably rehearsed in the mirror before getting in his car and driving over. Then he switched tactics. He talked about family, about how we had been through so much together, about how Ethan had made mistakes but was still my brother. He said I had to forgive him, that it was time to put this all behind us. I told him no. He looked stunned, like he hadn't even considered the possibility that I wouldn't budge. Then came the final plea. He blamed me, saying that if I had just let things go, if I hadn't sued, if I hadn't ruined Ethan's reputation, then Ethan wouldn't be in this position. He called me selfish, cruel, unforgiving. I stood my ground. For years, I had put Ethan first. I had given up everything so he could have a future. He had thrown it all away, and now he was paying the price for his own choices. Dad left in silence. Days later, I heard through acquaintances that Ethan had finally landed a job at a call center. It didn't last long. Within 2 months, he was fired for attitude issues. With nowhere else to turn, he tried reconnecting with old friends, but it didn't work. The people who had once been in his corner had seen the truth. They knew he had done this to himself. Then the GoFundMe happened. Someone sent me the link, and I almost laughed. There it was, a sob story about how his family had abandoned him, how he had lost everything, how he was trying to rebuild his life but couldn't do it alone. He was asking for donations, claiming he just needed a little help to get back on his feet. The internet wasn't kind. People immediately recognized him from my viral Reddit post.